Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dory Kurtman, and I'm a member of the Coalition Against Gun Violence's Steering Committee. And by the way, this is the only such organization of its type on the entire Central Coast, and we have been in operation since 1994. We welcome you to this evening's community forum entitled Safety in Our Schools, Homes, and Community. This forum is another in an 18-year-long history of informational and educational events sponsored by CAGV. We thank you for coming to the forum and also being concerned about this extremely important issue. As well, I'd like to give a big thanks to this evening's co-sponsors, the American Association of University Women, the Anti-Defamation League, Democratic Women of Santa Barbara County, Domestic Violence Solutions, the Glendon Association, the League of Women Voters, the Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center, United Methodist Women, and the Santa Barbara Women's Political Committee. These are just a few, by the way, of our sister organizations. I'd like to now introduce our Mayor, Helene Schneider, who will be this evening's moderator. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. First, we're going to do a little brief housekeeping. We changed the order at the last minute of ours. So if Kathy, if you can get in between Dr. Cash and Ethan there while and change your signs, bring your sign over, your little musical chairs. But welcome and thank you for being here. Let me just get my little... This is obviously a very important topic and one that we've been coming to see here and listen and learn from each other for months and years, and I really do want to appreciate the Coalition Against Gun Violence for putting this together. There really isn't anything much like this, similar to this, between LA and San Francisco that I know of. And so for an area such as ours, to have such representation and such leadership from not only Tony in particular, but all the coalition members, I do want to appreciate you. And so thank you. I've also, as mayor, became involved with an organization called Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and I want to acknowledge former Mayor Marty Bloom is in the room, who's currently a trustee for the City College. And during the transition time before getting sworn in, she alerted me to this organization, and it was one of the very first things I did as mayor was sign up through the U.S. Conference of Mayors for Mayors Against Illegal Guns. It's kind of a no-brainer what kind of mayor would be for illegal guns, I don't know. But especially in the last year, it's amazing how much that particular coalition has grown. There's now over 1,000 mayors throughout the country who has joined in 46 states and 1.5 million members who have signed up as supporters on the website. Last month, they did a study, an investigation. It was the first national investigation into individual buyers with criminal records seeking to illegally acquire guns via online gun sales. And the point of the investigation was to highlight one of the federal loopholes that we have here about not having universal background checks. Because as you know, background checks, federal law only requires licensed firearm dealers, not private sellers, to conduct background checks. So what's happening is that there's a lot of online sites popping up, and people who normally would have to go through a background check and know that they would never pass one are now buying guns illegally online, and there's no real way right now without this federal law in place to close that loophole. So that, obviously, we heard a lot about that during this year after the tragedy at Sandy Hook. They mentioned the investigation, they list an increase of online ads on one site, armslist.com. In December of 2011, they had 12,000 ads. And in August of this year, so just a couple of months ago, it went up to 83,000 ads. So you can know that people, and this is just one particular site. So tonight we're talking about safety in our homes, schools, and communities. And we're talking about safety is about prevention. And when we're talking about gun violence prevention, that's really the type of legislation and efforts that we're focusing on. It's about gun violence prevention. And so we really have quite an amazing panel here to talk about their perspective, whether it's at the school, at home, or in the community. But first, I really want to invite and acknowledge a leader in our community for many years. I think she was a founding member of the Coalition Against Gun Violence over 20 years ago, our state senator, Hannah Beth Jackson.
Thank you, thank you. I like being a founding member, except when you list the number of years ago that we started an organization. We called it Women Against Gun Violence at the time. We sort of were a spin-off from Los Angeles, where we recognized this really isn't just women against gun violence, it's sane people against gun violence. We couldn't say sane people against gun violence for the same reason, because then I guess insane people would be for gun violence, and we felt that that was sort of leaving out a large group of people who might respond as insane people might respond. So we are the Coalition Against Gun Violence. Tony, thank you so much for the extraordinary effort and commitment that you have had over the course of these past 20 years. I was reflecting as you were starting to talk about why I got involved in this. And the reason I did, I was thinking back to a time, it was actually about 50 years ago, when a president of the United States was assassinated with a firearm, a rifle that had been purchased they believe from the back of a comic book, where they were selling, if you recall, on the back of comic books, Marvel Comics and all, you could buy rifles for $19.99, $29.99, $39.99, and that was the culture in those days. And I thought, how can we be advertising weapons that are going to kill our leaders? Not thinking that we were killing others as well. And that struck me, and that's 50 years ago, and I was very young, of course, at the time, but I remember that to this very day, and we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what happened this year in Sacramento. When I was first elected, by the way, to the State Assembly back in 1998, or first session started actually actively January of 1999, we had another major catastrophe, gun-related catastrophe in Columbine. And I remember my colleagues standing up on the floor of the legislature talking about their personal experiences. One of my colleagues had a nephew who went to that school. Someone else whose family had lived there and who had one of the victims of Columbine. And I thought, we have got to stop this right now. And certainly here in California, we took steps immediately and have continued to try to take steps, because in California, we understand that owning a gun is not an unfettered right. And so we have done things. We've closed loopholes at gun shows. We have required a 10-day background check. We have recognized that part of gun violence is associated with mental illness. Part of it is not. Access, availability of firearms is a problem, so we have required in California that firearms, if you own them, you have to learn how to respect them and hopefully keep them in a locked area, particularly where there are children present. Now, these are all things, I don't know about you, but they just sound like kind of common sense to me. But one person's common sense is apparently another person's violation of their fundamental freedoms. And somewhere in between, we have got to come up with an answer to this problem. Now, there's a good crowd here tonight, and I know the Red Sox are playing, but not everybody here is a Red Sox fan. So the question you ask from that is, we've had Columbine, we've had Virginia Tech, we've had a series of massive, horrific acts of gun violence, and as we had Newtown, Sandy Hook, and then just recently we had the Naval Yard in Washington. That somehow has fallen into the ether. I don't know why. Have we become so desensitized, or has the gun lobby, and make no mistake, the NRA is the gun lobby. They are the gun manufacturers' lobby. Whenever there is a shooting, the sale of firearms goes up geometrically. whenever there's a shooting. And the NRA propagates and promotes the notion that now the government's going to take away your guns. And they come out, I hate to say with guns blasting, but the fact of the matter, excuse me, the fact of the matter is the gun lobby comes out and threatens people who don't agree with them. In fact, because of legislation that I brought this year, they have already suggested that they may try to recall me the way they did in Colorado. I say, folks, bring it on. Bring it on. Because we need sensibility when we deal with the issue of firearms. And the NRA had a small victory in Colorado in an election where they intentionally suppressed the vote, and they were able to recall 2 people who had supported reasonable gun laws. So this year, we had 18 measures that were primarily promoted from the horrific acts in Newtown. And I don't know about you, but if we can't move this nation forward with the notion that 20 little children were blown away, literally, figuratively, by a lone gunman who had no prior criminal record, 25 and 6-year-old babies. The notion that we cannot or have not moved forward from that, I think, is a stunning reminder that we do have much work to do. We had 18 bills presented. We had 13 bills signed by the governor. Among the bills he vetoed was a bill that I had brought. And interestingly enough, to talk about the courage or lack thereof, I was brought a bill by the Attorney General. Now, I was a new member of the State Senate, and a lot of my colleagues already had staffs up and running, and they had bills prepared, and I said, look, if there is something that I can do to be helpful. The Attorney General brought to me a bill, SB 567. It would have closed a loophole that arose after the legislature had passed the first assault weapons ban back in 1989. Then included on a list of banned firearms, assault weapons, was a shotgun with a revolving cylinder and a smooth bore, okay? Well, what the gun manufacturers, because they're very clever and they're totally driven by profit, what they did is they took the bore and they rifled it. They put in a rifled bore. I describe it is that it's got an internal area which is now not smoothed out and can allow a bullet to move at a greater velocity. So this is the precursor to an old assault weapon called a street sweeper, because this was an old machine gun assault weapon that was used in the 30s and 40s that would literally sweep through a street in very short order. You saw them in all the gangster movies. The Attorney General's office came to me and said, look, we're afraid that the fact that they have created this rifled bore on a cylinder, revolving cylinder, is the precursor to the next round of this very ugly assault weapon. So I said, great, and they brought in and they gave me a demonstration, and it was kind of creepy, but I saw what this firearm could do. It was very scary, actually, in the hands of people who shouldn't have firearms. So I brought the bill, and as I was moving the bill forward, the Attorney General's office refused to, they were the sponsor, but they refused to acknowledge that they were the sponsor and refused to support the bill. Yeah, what? Exactly. They brought the bill to me, but they would not take a public position in support of the legislation, which I thought was stunning. This is the Attorney General of the state of California. They persuaded me that this bill had legitimacy to it. I took some amendments to the bill to clarify what it meant. The NRA hated the bill, so I felt maybe I was doing something constructive. And at the end of the day, I got the bill through the legislature, but the governor vetoed it. Now, you have to understand the governor is a member of the NRA or prides himself in gun ownership, has some firearms himself. Okay. But when he vetoed the bill that would have prohibited people with known alcohol and substance abuse issues from owning a firearm for 10 years and vetoed that bill, in spite of all the data that indicates that people who have these propensities are more likely, by several times over, to conduct acts of violence using firearms, then I said we still have enormous work to do. He could veto mine, well, it's premature, or whatever the excuse was. In fact, he said that I'm not convinced that this amendment is necessary or justified at this time. It bans a small group of specialty rifles. Well, you know, a small group of specialty rifles can do a lot of damage, and have in the past. So we moved forward. There were some bills that he signed that were very helpful and productive, and California still leads the nation. We still are a no open carry state. I hope we will always stay that way. But I think what we need to do to continue this discussion is to show through actions, to show through examples the fact that we have a very serious problem in this state, in this country, whether it's having access to firearms, whether it's increasing violence and insensitivity in our society, or whether it's mental illness. There are 3 legs to this stool, but any one of them at any one time could release the kind of thing that brought us all here tonight to try to address the very serious nature of gun violence in our state and our country. So we've come a long way. We have a lot of work to do. I thank you all for being here, and all those of you who are listening and interested, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I want to explain how this evening's going to go. But first, actually, we've heard from one elected official. I do want to acknowledge there are a number of others in the room, and I hope I can get all of them. But I see from our school district, Ed Herron and Kate Parker, and Gail Edelson is here, and as well as I saw, well, obviously we have Councilmember Murillo is here, and I see Fred Shaw from the Carpinteria City Council is here, and I see council candidate was here, David Landecker for Santa Barbara City Council. Did I miss anyone from? Joyce. And Joyce, of course, is on the panel. So thank you all for being here as well. And I see Hillary Blackerby, who works for our Assembly Member Doss Williams. So thank you for being here. We have, as you can see, a wealth of information and expertise up here, and we're going to give each of them up to 5 minutes. It sounds like a lot. It does go by pretty quickly, especially with all the information that each of them have. Gina Carvalho will have a video to show for her 5 minutes and then briefly explain it afterwards. Have you ever been at a place where I moderate a panel? You know the sound when your time is up, but I'll play it for you. Oops, wait a minute, where does it go? Okay. You got that. So that is, you'll know they're coming if you don't stop talking. But we also want to hear from you, and so we really do have time to do both a good discussion about their component on this topic, and if you have questions, to please write them on their cards around, I think on your chairs, and we have volunteers who can pick them up, and I'll go through them, and we'll do as many as we can in the time we have. I also want to acknowledge Gary Atkins, who, if there's anything good going on, needs sound, is here tonight. And Larry Nimmer is here filming this evening. So this will be on the Coalition Against Gun Violence website or TVSB. It'll be on TVSB, so stay tuned and look for that. Okay, so I want to start with Tony Wellen, and in your packet you have the bios of everyone here, so I don't need to read them to you. You have them right there, but we have sections from the community, from schools, from law enforcement, and from organizations as well, and from students, so it's very exciting, and we'll start with Tony Wellen. Tony.
Don't let your little thing go for, wait a minute. I want to thank Senator Jackson for coming to speak with us today. I I want you to, this is not part of what I plan to say, but one of the things that the coalition does is we try to educate the community about the legislation that is happening in Sacramento. And we fully support gun violence prevention bills. And if you need to learn about any of these bills, you can find out from us. You have on your chair a little envelope that has information about joining, and also you can contact us through our website. I am very much available for people who have questions about any aspect. And so we need to become more involved in the understanding of this legislation. I mean, for Senator Jackson to put herself out there and really work hard for this legislation is difficult. And she needs the support of all of us. I know that she has it. So thank you very much, Senator Jackson. All right. When there's an epidemic, we know that precautions must be taken. What if 30,000 people died from the flu? We take precautions. We get flu shots. We wash our hands frequently. Well, every year, approximately 100,000 Americans are shot, and 30,000 die from gun violence. That is a public health epidemic. Today, 7 children died from gun violence. We all remember the 20 children of Sandy Hook. Well, every 3 days, 21 families mourn the child they lost. The American Academy of Pediatrics sees guns as a threat to lives of children just as much as bacteria and viruses. So where does prevention and safety begin? It begins in the home. Precautions to dangers in the home are common. We child-proof bottles so they don't get aspirin. We cover wall outlets. We have bicycle helmets, safety car seats. You expect your family and your neighbors with a pool to keep the gate locked. What about the gun? Although mass shootings get more attention, children are far more likely to be killed at home. Why? Well, 33 to 40% of American homes have guns, but adults in about 25% of those homes with children don't store their guns safely. What can we do to keep our home safe? First, if you choose to have a firearm and you have children under 18, California state law mandates that the weapon be safely locked and unloaded, because if a child gets a hold of that gun, you can be charged with a crime. It is not okay to tell kids, don't touch the gun. Safety is the parent's responsibility. Second, ask. Ask means asking safe kids, is there a gun where my child plays? Ask friends or relatives. It's an embarrassing question to ask, maybe, but you'd ask whether anyone was sick. This is a national program, and Santa Barbara parents should get involved in it. If you look in your program book, there is a page that discusses this and a website to search it. Next, media and violence. It makes sense to limit children's exposure to violence. There's an on-off button on the TV and the computer. Listen to your children and pay attention to their social media interaction. Cyberbullying is real and has caused violence. In today's LA Times, Facebook announced that children 13 to 17 can no longer be protected. Their information is going to go out there. Fourth, mental health. High-profile shootings have focused on mental health, but less than 5% of the severely mentally ill are considered dangerous. There are 3 problems: easy access to firearms, inadequate mental health services due to lack of funding in counties, insurance companies whose coverage for mental health is abysmal, and a culture where families tend to deny and not deal with emotional problems. Safety is about proactive planning for prevention. It does take a village. Therefore, each of us must make firearm safety a primary focus in our homes, in our schools, and in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to now look at the screen right here, and then Gina Carvalho will come on up. And I think you want to
Maybe more than
focus
anybody
that.
else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy. I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual,
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad.
Not able to sleep, or sleeping too much.
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless. Drinking, using drugs. Staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself. It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask. They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
that's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
You're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing
Yourself.
over.
That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself. What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad.
How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
a lot of people think about killing themselves. Adults and kids. Most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with
I'm
this.
gonna kill myself, take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure.
But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
But don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut, because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference.
All the difference.
In your kid's life.
Hello. I think that spoke for itself. This video, which I'm showing you, wondering, there's a relationship, quite obviously, between means and actions. And the most important consideration that we all have is the restriction of lethal means to an impulsive act. sometimes driven by mental illness, sometimes driven by other causes. But I think it's very, very important that we take this issue extremely seriously. And my work at the Glendon Association, which is a nonprofit, it's an educational training and research organization that looks at what is driving not just suicide but violence. And these studies have been conducted nationally and internationally. And we can go into understanding the dynamics, but at the point of a suicidal, and I suppose a violent act, there is always, at some point in suicide, an ambivalence. There is always a part of the person that does not want to die. And if you take away the moment of pause, that is more surely going to happen. So this is why I think I was invited to be here at the panel, because in the United States, over 38,000 people die by suicide. Of those 38,000, 19,000 die by guns. And that's more than homicide, unintended shootings. The overall rate of suicide it's rising so rapidly that it now outnumbers car crashes. So we have an issue in this country with firearms, but we also are in great danger from ourselves. So it's an issue that I think we all need to address, look at, and I think the video, which was produced by my colleagues at the Mayo Clinic, is on YouTube, and I'm sending it, and I have been sending it around so people can show it to youth, that really we need to ask. And I think the issue that Tony was saying too, we need to ask about guns. So, and also just in closing, my work here, also at the Santa Barbara Response Network, is to reach out when there has been an action, a suicide or a violence or a traumatic action. And we can come in as volunteers and help families who have been impacted by suicide or violence. And I have materials at the table there, and I'm free here to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And of course, there will be time for questions. If you have that card and you want to start asking questions, great. And it's my honor to introduce and welcome up, you can speak from there or come up here, Elsa Granados, the Executive Director of the Rape Crisis Center, another amazing leader for a long time in our community. Thank you, Elsa.
Thank you, Helen. So once again, as our nation debates whether or not firearms are an effective safety measure, the issue of sexual violence and rape comes up. And when it comes to risk reduction, and I use that word intentionally, not prevention, but risk reduction, one of the seemingly least complex solutions is to carry a gun. But that doesn't address prevention or the elimination of sexual violence. The most effective way for the prevention of sexual violence is to eradicate a culture where rape is tolerated. Addressing this is much more complex. And at Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center, we support survivors in fending off an assault by whatever means they have, whether that means that they do it through assertive communication, using their bodies, using a frying pan, pepper spray, or a gun. But let me say a few things about guns and sexual violence. Even if women are armed with a gun or any other weapon, it doesn't guarantee safety. To illustrate, how many of us fumble around our purse for a ringing telephone? I often feel the pressure to find my ringing telephone so as not to disturb others, yet I can't seem to get to it quickly enough. And so I'm wondering if we think that trying to reach for a gun from our purse in the midst of an assault situation would come any easier. Having access to a gun doesn't come instantaneous or doesn't happen instantaneously. None of us are the person in I Dream of Jeannie who can just blink her eyes and then there's the gun ready for use appearing in our hand. Another point is that all of us are used to seeing movies in which the person carrying a gun takes aim and shoots accurately. Not true. One needs proper training to shoot and maintain a gun. At the Rape Crisis Center, we advise people who want to use guns for self-defense to familiarize themselves with the weapon, and this means taking a certified course, and also means keeping their skills up to date and practicing on a regular basis. If someone is uncomfortable using a gun, they will be awkward in handling it. Studies show that women who use gun in self-defense and are unfamiliar with their use often are injured with their own gun. Also, they are easily taken away by the assailant. But let's say you own a gun, you're comfortable using it, and you have extensive training. I'm sure most of you have heard recently about the 26,000 sexual assaults in the military. Although not all of them had guns, some did. And of those survivors in the military, they theoretically not only had basic training, but they had ongoing practice, and still it did not prevent their sexual assault. Military women, one right after another, testified before Congress to say that they felt greater fear from their male counterparts than the identified enemy due to the threat of sexual assault. Which brings me to another issue. 85% of sexual assaults occur between people who know each other. So studies show that we are less likely to use a gun against someone we know than against a stranger. So although the use of a gun against an assailant sounds like a good idea, it might not be a viable solution. This addresses the often heard statement of, if I was going to be assaulted and I would take my gun and then you fill in the blank for yourself. Unfortunately, none of us knows how he or she will react in a situation like this. None of us plans on having a gun and then not using it in an assault situation, and yet we see that this happens. My last point is that just because you interrupt a sexual assault with a weapon doesn't make the experience less traumatic. Attempted assaults are no less scarring. You are still threatened in one of the most intimate and personal ways. Your trust in another was breached to the point of threatening their life with a weapon, and so how can that have a healthy outcome? Finally, today I'm not posing a blanket solution for any of this. I'm posing questions that I hope will lead us to a better outcome than what we have now. Telling women to carry guns is a Band-Aid solution to America's rape epidemic. Altering our mindset to respect women and each other is the only enduring way to reduce or eliminate sexual violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Cash.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'd have to say that the single most important thing that we do each and every day is do our best to ensure that students are safe at school for a whole host of reasons. The primary reason would be that parents drop their students off or send them to our schools each and every day, and those children are probably the single, doubly, triply most important thing in their lives, and so we take that responsibility very, very seriously. And as a school district, we have to balance two really important concepts. One is ensuring that our students are safe while at school, and the second is ensuring that our schools remain educational places and don't become prisons or look like prisons for our students. We really look at this two ways, both internally and externally in the school district. We have a lot more control over the internal things, and some of the issues that we face in relationship to this are how kids treat each other, how students are engaged at school, whether students are anonymous when they come to school, how the adults at those schools, our schools, treat those students. We're really, I think, on a good path in relationship to how students and adults at our schools treat each other with the implementation of our restorative justice. We're calling it restorative approaches. We've noticed a huge and significant reduction in suspensions and expulsions through the implementation of this. And students report regularly to myself anecdotally that they feel school is a different place for them as a result of the way that they are treated by the adults. I can't imagine a more powerful thing for our students to feel than that school is a place for them. So getting kids engaged in what happens at schools is also an extraordinarily important part of our internal work, and that it means that schools need to reflect the neighborhoods that they come from. Our schools need to have a cultural relevance for our students, and we are working really hard on ensuring that every teacher, every classroom, and every school is culturally proficient, so that when students come to the school, they see themselves in our schools. They see the things that they value, that their families value, and that helps them see that school is a place for them, and they become more engaged. We've done a lot of tactical things. In addition to that, we've expanded our youth service specialists internally. We've created more classes and provided more support services for our students who are currently identified as emotionally disturbed. And we have each and every school engaged in an anti-bullying campaign, and Suzanne Peck's here, and we're using her great work, Stand Tall, and we love that, and we're happy with the work that's happening. Are we perfect internally? Absolutely not. We still have work to do. The other half of it is our external work, and we should all be really, really happy with the incredible partnership that we have with the City of Santa Barbara and the County of Santa Barbara. In particular, Santa Barbara Police Department and the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department have been extraordinary partners with the school community, placing school resource officers on our campuses, continuing with providing that sort of on-the-job, on-site counseling for kids, some of which is in relationship to the video you just saw, with kids considering taking their own lives, and they have someone there that they trust and believe in, and oftentimes it's a police officer or a sheriff's deputy that they can talk to. Post Sandy Hook, I unfortunately happened to be at Dos Pueblos High School as the principal when Columbine happened. And I remember very clearly a number of community meetings that we held in relationship to what we would do differently at schools. And we did the same thing post Sandy Hook. I'm really happy, and you should be happy to know that we had meetings immediately with Chief Sanchez and Sheriff Brown about how we could ensure that our schools continued to be safe places. And both of them immediately sent out their SWAT team officers to do walk-arounds on our school campuses and point out areas that they felt we could do a better job in securing and providing safe places for kids. I mean, I'm talking about immediate. That happened. I mean, we had a meeting in December and another one in January. And it really emphasized to me that schools weren't just islands in our community, that they really were part of our community, and our police officers, our law enforcement officials really took ownership in ensuring that schools were a safe place. We've done tactical stuff as well that I'll get to if anyone asks any questions.
Nicely done. Thank you, Dr. Cash. Councilmember Kathy Murillo.
Thank you, Mayor Schneider. Let me know when I have 1 minute left.
Okay,
I'm trained here. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. What a serious conversation, and what a pleasure to be with people here who are focusing on this subject, keeping people safe in our community. As a city council member, the city should create safe spaces for our youth. I'll be talking about the focus of my public services is our young people. This very building, a library, is a safe space for our children and our teens, our parks. We're so proud, aren't we, Helene, of our recreation services that we offer our young people. And it helps them make positive choices in life. And I'm talking about preventing young people from getting involved in street violence, and in particular, gang violence, which is the focus of a group that I've had the honor to found with a group of other people recently. It's called the Pro-Youth Movement, and it includes members of the faith community, educators, people like Missy Zaitzoff, who's sitting back there. Thank you, Missy. She's came from the Alternatives to Violence project, which trains people in conflict resolution, communication, and mediation. And when we called a meeting, the first meeting of the pro-youth movement, we had members of the Alternatives to Violence Project come, and now all of our leaders are taking this training, and with the goal that we can pass it on to our youth and also to the families that we will be working with. One of our projects is called Las Abuelitas, that means the grandmothers. We're especially proud of this project that is coming out of our meetings, and it is empowering elder women to mentor teens. And I love this idea. We had a retreat at Casa de Maria. I'd like to thank them for offering that retreat at such a nominal fee last weekend. We had 25 women there, and it was conducted in Spanish, and it's like a flower blossoming. I really have a lot of hope in creating, it's community building that will help our young people if they feel connected to society, if they do well in school, if they feel pride in living in Santa Barbara, that this is their city, then maybe they won't see their brothers who live on the other side of State Street as their enemy. And that's really what breaks my heart when I see, and they're mostly Latinos. If I'm stereotyping, somebody call me on it, but you know, one Latino boy fighting another, and they really are brothers, and they should be united in fighting against the establishment or things in our society that don't work for them, social injustice maybe. We also, the pro-youth movement also has a schools and education subcommittee, and we support the restorative justice programs in the schools. We have a juvenile justice committee, which is looking at police relations. And we're meeting, and it's funny how when we get together, all these issues bubble to the surface, and we eventually want to do something like Neighborhood Watch, but with the focus which I'm calling Neighbor Watch, where you're actually having relationships with the people who live on your street. And if you see an elder who needs groceries or help, if you see a stressed out family living in poverty and you know that the children are not being watched, if there's a family that's impacted by alcoholism or domestic violence.
You have one more minute.
Thank you. That neighbors can help neighbors. And so that's our goal actually with the abuelitas is to start to make every neighbor feel like they're responsible for everyone else who lives around them. And I wanted to say to Tony that the woman who started Las Abuelitas, I met her in De La Guerra Plaza after the vigil, after the Newtown shootings, and we just started talking, and it was one of those magical moments when you come together with someone and you have the same idea. So thank you, and I think that's what the Coalition Against Gun Violence is about. Ethan Breyer's going to talk next, and we've just connected him with Suzanne Peck, who's working on bullying, and he's with our youth council, and they've been talking about doing something to address bullying. So thank you for creating this space where we're all working to build peace in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. We are very fortunate in the city of Santa Barbara to have a youth council. It was put together when Harriet Miller was mayor, I believe, and the number of teens that go through the Santa Barbara Youth Council are just stellar. And so I'm really honored that one of those leaders is here tonight, Ethan Breyer. Welcome.
Hello. So besides being on the Santa Barbara Youth Council, I am also a junior at Dos Pueblos. So I kind of have a lot of experience with teens going through depression, and also what the first speaker said with not just depression, but also like feeling uncomfortable at school with bullying. So first I want to go into talking about the Santa Barbara Youth Council's, their membership in the Committee in Combating Youth Violence. So what we're trying to do is we see youth violence stemming from kids not doing well in school. So in order to prevent that, we feel it's very important for students to kind of keep up their grades, maybe with getting peer help, also getting tutoring help from the school administration, which is very important. Also, besides help in school, they also need help with maybe social experiences. So the social experiences could, for instance, maybe somebody has trouble making friends in school. The administration could try and help that kid find other students that they are alike with if they have social difficulties. But mostly the youth, the committee combating youth violence is, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit off right now.
You're doing great. You got 3 whole minutes left.
So that's basically the committee in combating youth violence. The Youth Council, what Councilwoman Murillo just mentioned, also wants to start addressing a project with bullying, the bullying issue. So what we could do is basically try and get peer mediation groups. That was one of our ideas that we talked about in our last meeting. We could also, besides peer mediation, there's also outreach programs that leadership groups within Santa Barbara could help with. And lastly, I want to talk about the R-Word Committee. So that's against people with mental illnesses. They use the word retarded, which is it's very mean, and it's also extremely hurtful to not just people with mental illnesses, but also if that word is directed at somebody who somebody's making fun of. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness of why that word is hurtful and also why it is important to stop doing that. And thank you.
Thank you. Before Sergeant Harwood gets started, who's collecting cards? I want to make sure, if you could go around, and so if I can start looking at them, if you have a card, just raise your hand with the card and someone will collect them and I can start looking at those. Thank you. From our own Santa Barbara Police Department, Sergeant Harwood.
Good evening. I was asked to address 4 different issues here very quickly, so I'll move fast. But the first was I was asked to give some insight on statistics with regard to gun violence in our community in recent years. And I think our statistics with regard to gun incidents kind of mirror our trend in violent crime, in that in the last couple of years, last 3 years, it's been down from what it was prior to that. Back in 2008, we had 39 gun-related offenses. 2009, 56. 2010, 45. 2011, 29. 2012, 38. And this year, up to October 1st, 29. Not all of those were substantiated through investigation, but at some point in the course of the call, it was alleged that a gun was involved. So that's how those were recorded. I know that folks would arguably say that any incident involving a gun is one too many, and I don't disagree with that. I think if you talk to most police officers here, they will tell you that relative to other communities, I don't think we have a gun problem like other places do. We do not have special officers that deal specifically with gun-related crimes. We haven't reached that need like they do in places like Chicago or New York or elsewhere. We are focused overall with regard to violent crime, whether it's gun-related or not, and we place a high priority on that, particularly gang-related crime. In fact, many of our recent gun-related incidents have been gang-related. When it comes to dealing with violent crime, like I said, those gun-related investigations do take a priority. Fortunately, our investigators are not so overwhelmed in cases that they are able to devote all of their resources and really leave no stone unturned with regard to those investigations. Let's see. Another point that I was asked to address was what are the police doing to combat gun violence, specifically in terms of like community policing efforts. Since the Columbine shooting, throughout law enforcement and here in Santa Barbara, agencies everywhere really examined how they responded to mass shooting types of incidents. And we put a protocol in place with regard to active shooting incidents, whether those happen at schools, postal facility like what happened in Goleta, other places of employment, anywhere where these things can happen, our officers are trained and prepared to deal with those circumstances. Additionally, we, when requested, help train or counsel employees, both city employees from other departments and school employees and others in what an appropriate response would be. So we're all on the same page with regard to how we can effectively respond to a critical incident like that. I was asked with regard to kind of continue on what Dr. Cash said. We do have an ongoing and very good dialogue with our school district representatives. We always, not only do we talk about safety, but we talk about a whole host of other issues like after-school programs and other things that involve our children, which really are our most precious resource. I think with regard, and presently one of the discussions that we're having has to do about, when the school should be placed on lockdown. And so that's something that we are working with them on, I think, coming up with an effective protocol. My feeling is that there's a greater likelihood that an incident is going to occur outside of a school campus and then maybe flow onto a school campus, meaning the perpetrators run onto a school campus, as opposed to an incident happening, originating at the school. That's as the public information officer, that's kind of what I've sensed is most likely to happen. I was asked to discuss neighborhood watch programs, and their effectiveness. We have about 20 or so neighborhood watch programs here in the city. It really depends on the neighborhood and the folks involved. They all start out with a lot of fanfare and a lot of highly motivated participants. Quite often they kind of taper off and fizzle out. It really depends on the motivation of the participants. We meet every year with all of our neighborhood watch captains, and we counsel them and help give them insight on how to run effective programs. And with our downtown organization, we have a block captain program that we interact with frequently and meet with quarterly. And then lastly, I was asked on what's the department's position on holding a gun buyback? And really, our feelings are kind of mixed with regard to an effort like that. My feeling is that they're effective in generating a lot of awareness. However, I've yet to be convinced that they really get guns out of the hands of the people that we really want them out of the hands of most, like gang members and people that we know to be violent criminals. The people that I often see turning in guns in those circumstances are people that, they've got the old shotgun in the closet, or the old .22, or something like that. And, those are certainly things that could be used in a heat of passion or in a suicide or something like that. So it's not bad to get those things that are unwanted, out of the community. But I've yet to see these programs really being highly effective in getting the guns that we want out of those perpetrators that we really want them to get out of the hands of. Also, they're very costly.
Thank you.
Okay.
People have more questions about that, because it is a question I get sometimes too, so that might be a question to come up and to expand on. Okay, thank you very much, Sergeant. And now Daniel Ramirez from the Cause Action Fund.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I would answer two questions in my short 5 minutes. One, the first question, what can we do as a community to improve safety in our homes, schools, and neighborhoods? Well, we can be active, not just in the discussion, but to get up and out into the community and involve with organizations such as the Coalition Against Gun Violence. Be active. Cause is a very active organization. Our mission and goal is to build grassroots power to invoke social, economic, and environmental justice for the people of California's Central Coast region through policy research, leadership development, organizing, and advocacy. CAUSE today began as two separate organizations, CAUSE in Ventura County in 2001 and Pueblo in Santa Barbara County in 2003. And both organizations emerged from the living wage movement, and in 2012, the two organizations joined forces, and CAUSE took on Pueblo's work in Santa Barbara County, creating a regional organization for social, economic, and environmental justice. We also strive for public safety and a sustainable economy and environment. We also strive for a better democracy, because we all want our children's children to be better off than we are, and that comes from having great leaders in government. CAUSE continues to help many different communities work together more effectively by engaging neighbors in a grassroots approach both locally and regionally. Through community organizing and policy advocacy, we have passed 5 living wage ordinances benefiting thousands of workers and protected our communities from being exposed to environmental hazards like a liquid natural gas terminal in Oxnard and a metal scrapyard in Santa Maria. Those are just some of the few accomplishments amongst many that we have done. So let me get to that second question. Where does safety begin? Safety begins with all of us, with you and with me. So as we leave here tonight, let's become advocates for peace and a better community. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, I'll take care of that. Okay, I'll do that as Sergeant Williams gets started from the Santa Barbara Sheriff Department. Thank you.
Greetings. Well, let me just start off by saying I'm happy to be here and glad that I could represent the Sheriff's Office in this forum. I've got a handful of questions here. I'll try to get to some of them. But I want everyone to know that from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office and the 650 employees that we have, over 300 deputies on the street, the #1 priority for us is public safety, for young and old alike. That's our #1 priority. And a lot of times when deputies first start out, they say the same thing that firefighters do when they start out. Why do you want to be in this business? And that's, I want to help people. And so they do. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's a misconception of what that safety looks like. And sometimes it looks very violent when you see a SWAT team on the street. And like Sergeant Harwood said, our officers as well, our deputies, are more geared up today than they have been because of some of these mass shootings. A lot of deputies that are driving around in patrol cars have more body armor, they have more firepower, and our policies have changed. They've changed so that we allow our deputies to have more of a rapid response to some of these violent incidents. So again, safety is our #1 priority. And as Dr. Cash talked about our school resource deputies, we have several of them that are full-time assigned, one to Dos Pueblos, one to San Marcos High School, and both those deputies split the junior high that's there as well. And I asked them recently, what is one of the biggest problems that you see at the school? What's causing you the most headaches, as I'd like to say to the deputies? And they said, Facebook, bullying, the comments, the threats, the things that are going on. And when I see them at the end of a shift and they're pulling their hair out, they've got their headaches, they're tired, it tells me one thing, that they're engaged and they care. And I can tell you they do care. And all of us care. But when they're caring for the kids, they're involved, they've got relationships with the kids at the high schools and at the junior high. And that's a key thing. And of course, with the school administrators, the teachers, it definitely goes a long way to figuring out the problems, what they are, before they happen. I know Sheriff Brown he's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and he is also on the commission, the State Mental Health Commission. And one of the things he wanted me to pass on too is he's been working relentlessly with the Mental Health Commission and trying to solve some of these problems that we have. And again, with law enforcement, it's a balance. I mean, we have to balance people's rights at the same time, stopping crime. And if you look at a lot of these mass shootings that have happened in our country, a lot of them, mental illness has been involved. And so I think some things that can be done are trying to create more ways to keep the weapons and firearms out of those who have mental illnesses. One personally I was involved with is the 2006 Goleta postal shooting at our Goleta postal facility. I was on the SWAT team at the time. And this will tie into a question I was asked that said, do we work with the police department on incidents that happen in pockets, areas of the county that are close to the city? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, as we were deployed on that situation in the Goleta postal facility, the Santa Barbara Police SWAT team self-deployed, met us there, and both the teams worked almost flawlessly together to bring that whole thing to an end. So, I'll go into one of the questions I have here. One of it talks about, and I don't know if anyone is aware, so I thought I'd address this, explain the county policy regarding officer training on firearms proficiency. First off, and there was something somebody else mentioned about having a weapon, owning a weapon, and they said it's important that you train, that you're familiar, that you know safe handling. And people ask me all the time, friends that know I'm a cop, they say, hey Mark, what would you recommend somebody get a gun to protect themselves? And my answer is always, maybe. It depends. We train on a regular basis. The state of California considers firearms proficiency a perishable skill. In other words, if you don't practice, you lose that skill. So we are mandated by the state to have so many hours of firearms proficiency. We qualify with our weapons once a quarter at minimum. That's our policy, we have to do that. So every deputy that's on the street know that they have a minimum level of firearms proficiency that is pretty high, and it's higher than some other areas in some other states. So that's one thing. Let's see, there was another question here that talks about what's my experience with the knowledge and skill level of the average gun owner. That's kind of tough to say, but the people that I do know own guns typically have some knowledge and some safety with that. And every time a deputy is in a home and they know firearms are in the home, that's their number one concern. And my time is up.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, Sergeant. From law to order, and now we have District Attorney Joyce Dudley.
Thank you. I've been district attorney for a little over 3 years, and I was asked to focus on what our policy has been. My policy has consistently been prevention, intervention, and prosecution in that order. And so the relevant new programs that I brought to the office, first, prevention. The best program we have for prevention is our truancy program, because what we've decided is that the best form of crime prevention is to keep kids in school. With excellent professionals like Dr. Cash, our kids are getting a great education across the board, and we want to make sure that they stay there. This year, our new program started out with over 6,000 children in Santa Barbara County being truant. We managed to get them back in school and re-engaged, and I'm happy to say only one child was prosecuted for not going to school. So we're getting them back where they belong. In terms of intervention, I've started a misdemeanor diversion program so that people who commit minor crimes are going into education programs versus incarceration programs. And in terms of prosecution, I've taken a very aggressive stance on people who attempt to purchase firearms who should not have firearms. In the past, when we get the DOJ notices that someone had attempted to purchase a firearm, I think they went into some kind of circular file. They certainly didn't go anywhere because they didn't get the firearm. But I decided to take it up a notch with that and now prosecute people who even attempt to purchase a firearm when it's unlawful for them to have them. Right now, I have 20 active prosecutions of those kinds of cases throughout Santa Barbara County. And the people who attempted to purchase a firearm who should not have been people who are convicted of felonies, people who are on probation, and one of the terms and conditions that they not have a firearm, people who've been convicted of misdemeanor assaults, people who have domestic violence restraining orders, people who have violated the federal Brady prohibition against them having guns, and people who've been convicted of misdemeanor crimes of 245, assault with a deadly weapon, and again, domestic violence. We want to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns lawfully or stop from having guns don't have access to weapons. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was quite a lot of information. We do have a number of questions I have up here. Of course, if there are others, please, if you can bring them up here. And I'm going to start here. A lot of them talk about something specific for one person, but could be brought open up to anyone on the panel who'd like to answer it. I'm going to start with Dr. Cash, and you mentioned the restorative approaches process. And the question is, how does that process work? Explain the process, especially as it relates to preventing gun violence or some other horrific tragedy in schools.
Well, the process is about developing relationships between students and staff, and giving people that are engaged in conflict an opportunity to understand what the conflict's about, to share some responsibility in that conflict, and then to come to some resolution to that. So what we end up with is kids in class, imagine that, as opposed to excluding kids from school, sending them home and having no resources either themselves or their families in order to deal with the conflict that could have been generated at school, or oftentimes it's generated in their neighborhood. So we don't look at it as a gun violence solution, we look at it as a way to create a campus culture where everyone's welcome and everybody sees themselves as not only part of the solution, but actively engaged in creating those solutions.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? It was pretty specific. Okay, thank you very much. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I thought that there might be some thoughts related to that, and as it connects to tonight. Maybe we'll start with Tony and go down if anyone would like to put all those pieces together and connect the dots. Tony?
For those of you who don't know, pardon me, this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. There are 9 women a week who are killed with a gun in domestic violence situations. Domestic Violence Solutions is here. They have information for people. A lot of people don't know that domestic violence begins with just a push or a bad word, and it escalates. There are shelters. There's a shelter in Santa Barbara, and you need to be aware of this. Please pick up materials at their table, because this can happen at any socioeconomic level in any ethnicity. It knows no bounds, and it is increasing, unfortunately.
Okay. Anyone else? Gina? Elsa?
I think the only comment I would make on domestic violence or any other assault would be that the trauma that occurs on the victim is extremely long-lasting and needs to be addressed. And the quicker that a person can get to some kind of mental health would be really important. So.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I grew up in an alcoholic home and have some experience with the recovery world, and we may not get to a question about substance abuse, so I wanted to introduce it here that a family that has issues including drunkenness and violence that is so ripe for the kind of tragedy that I think we're trying to prevent here. And there are so many resources everywhere in Santa Barbara, especially our 12-step programs are very strong. In terms of teens, the Alateen programs are strong, Al-Anon programs. If you're in relationship with someone, if you have a loved one who has a substance abuse problem, an alcohol addiction, it's old-fashioned and it's ugly, and I would just, because this is a message going out to the public, that, seek help, because there really is a wonderful life out there without alcohol and drugs and violence, and we can all rise above. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
With In a domestic violence case, many times children are also victims in witnessing the drama unfolding. And to stop the recidivism from happening when that child grows up thinking that that is how you treat someone that you love, I feel a lot about investing more in intervention and prevention. In particular, one great organization in town, such as CALM, does really great work with children. And I believe that having a more values-based budget by putting more resources into programs like that would help stem that domestic violence happening in the home.
Great. There are a couple questions following up on the gun buyback issue, and someone asked if the community raised the funds for a gun buyback, would the sheriff and police department sponsor it? And someone asked if a gun buyback reduces the threat of suicide or accidental gun injury, wouldn't it be valuable? So maybe just a sense of, I know Sergeant Harwood, you were in the middle saying, well, there's some pros and some cons, and maybe others have other thoughts about that too, but maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yes, there's definitely pros and cons, and with regard to as far as effectiveness, I think getting guns out of places where they could be used in a crime of passion, used in a suicide, that's where it would likely be effective. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't see gang members and other people that violent criminals coming to these events and turning in their guns, and so in that regard I'm a little apprehensive as far as the effectiveness. Nevertheless, there's other great things about them. They are opportunities to raise awareness about the issue in the community, and so again, pros and cons. It's more than simply just raising the funds for the sake of giving people the incentive to come in. Any day of the week, a person can come to the police department or the sheriff's department and turn in weapons for their destruction, and they do. They often do. However, what would be required not only for the monetary or whatever incentive is to attract people to the event, gift certificates, whatever it may be, not only is that required, but there's also a substantial cost to the law enforcement agency that's involved. The cost of property personnel and officers to staff the event during, and then to deal with the associated issues following the event. There's a cost to finding a storage solution for the property that we take in. At the police department, and I'm sure at the sheriff's department as well, there is a constant flow of property coming in, and we're trying to make space for property coming out. So there's a cost associated with that. Additionally, there will be a cost of personnel taking all of these weapons to the Los Angeles area and paying for getting them destroyed. So these are all kind of hidden costs that would need to be addressed, I think, for a buyback to be viable.
Okay. Tony, did you want to add something?
Yes. I do understand that there are costs involved for law enforcement, but there have been many communities across the state, from San Bernardino, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, that have held successful gun buybacks. And I have talked to Chief Sanchez, and he has a very affirmative position on this. The idea being, if you can remove 2 or 3 guns from the community that could have caused a problem, it's worth the effort. And it is an educational opportunity also to educate the public about the dangers of guns. I'm not going to say that you're going to take guns away from those people who are in the criminal world, but there might be a family that has children, or there is mental illness, or certainly in case of domestic violence, where a gun needs to be removed from the home, and this is an opportunity. What the plan would be to offer 100 debit cards, debit cards, and the it would be $100 for a handgun and $200 for a rifle. This has been something that is being talked about and planned all over the state of California to happen on December 14th, which is the one-year anniversary of Sandy Hook. And I just want to let you know that there is a group in Washington that is doing something quite opposite. Everybody get out their guns on that day. So this is an opportunity to do something statewide that the Coalition Against Gun Violence is enthusiastic about, and we're hoping to encourage law enforcement to come along with this idea as well.
So there are a couple of questions here that have to do with access to services, especially getting teens in particular in schools to know that they exist. So maybe, Ethan, you can start thinking about this, Dr. Cash. Gina, basically things like, are there suicide prevention outreach programs in the schools, not just for the counselors, but like a peer group? How can students learn about what to do if something should happen? The question was asking, it's not just a meeting once a year to talk about schedules, just doesn't cut it. What can happen within the school process, especially as it relates to getting good information out and dealing with peer pressure, bullying, all those kind of things on a regular basis. And if anyone wants to start taking that, please do.
Well, sure. I'm the school guy. I'll take the last issue first, and that is kind of the pressure issue. Fascinating. I'm not going to try to shuffle any blame anywhere else, because we certainly have enough of it that we hold ourselves accountable for. But high schools really are a prisoner of IHEs, Institutes of Higher Education, as to what the expectations are for a student's experience while they're in high school, academically, socially, what clubs, organizations they belong to, what grades they get, what classes they take. And that has created its own, I think, very perverse system of pressure that's put on kids. Interestingly, our high schools, and it's ironic that we have a DP student here, but Dos Pueblos is taking the lead of our 3 high schools, and they have convened a panel of, and I don't know if you're on it, Ethan, of students, parents, both English-speaking and Spanish-speaking parents, teachers, former students from the high school, to come back and talk about the issues in relationship to the intense pressure that our high school students feel about the need to succeed and get on to their college or university, and the impact that it has on their daily life and their planning and their feeling about themselves and their self-worth and everything else. I'm very proud of that effort. I think they had their first meeting, and I heard it went really well. A lot of people showed up and they had a great conversation. We hope we believe that'll also be something that'll be happening at San Marcos High School and Santa Barbara High School as well. We have anonymous tip lines at our schools that students can submit anonymously if they're feeling threatened or bullied. Each of our secondary schools has a psychiatric assistance team, in essence, which consists of the school psychologists, counselors, administrators, and teachers that are called together anytime any adult on campus or any student comes forward with information to lead anyone to believe that a student is considering taking their own life. And that team moves into action very quickly and begins to provide a supportive network for that student and their family, trying to find out what the issues are, what the resources may be. Do some kids fall through the cracks? Unfortunately, they do. When I was the principal of Dos Pueblos, we did have a student take her own life. Tragic, something I'll obviously never forget, nor will anyone in that community. But we do have systems in place. We feel pretty good about the work we're doing with Fighting Back, the Council of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, through the Youth Services Specialists, which provides for many of our students a really safe place to come and talk about issues that they're facing on campus. But we need to do more.
Ethan, do you want to add? And then Kathy.
So what Dr. Cash said about the kids feel a lot of pressure to get into good colleges and succeed in school. The movie that was screened at Dos Pueblos last year, Race to Nowhere, illustrated that very well. And then the panel that Dr. Cash was talking about that met on Monday talked about that as well. So a lot of kids feel like they need to do the very best that they can, so they enroll in the most rigorous things, and they try and do the most extracurricular activities as they can, and that puts a lot of pressure on them. And then they feel very pressured, and they don't really want to. It's very hard to experience a lot of that pressure. I know from experience that I put a lot of pressure on myself. Fortunately, I don't feel extremely pressured because I have learned to cope with it. But I know a lot of kids that still feel like they have problems dealing with that pressure. I know some kids that go to the school psychologist at DP, which is very helpful. Some kids talk to their counselors. But besides that, I'm not sure of any other prevention groups that are on campus.
Councilmember Murillo.
Thank you. Dr. Cash, you have a couple of people working in the school system, Ishmael Huerta and Melissa Garcia. Are those the resource specialists that you were referring to?
No, we're talking about at each high school campus and every junior high campus, we have a youth services specialist that's a trained counselor, but Ishmael and Melissa are awesome resources for our schools as well.
Right, and they help what we would call the at-risk kids, right? Find their place in the schools or how to do well in school. I just wanted to congratulate you on that function.
Ishmael Huerta has, without a doubt, changed the lives of, I would say, over 100 young men in our community. Last year, he had, at one of our high schools, 25 students that he worked with. All 25 had self-determined and had been determined by our system to not be graduating from high school. All 25 graduated from high school. 12 of them are at Santa Barbara City College right now. That's the power of relationship. Really should thank Monique Limon, who came in late, our board president, for ensuring that great stuff happens.
But to relate it back to the question about access to resources, there are great nonprofits, domestic violence solutions back there. There are a lot of families, especially the monolingual Spanish-speaking families, they may not know how to connect, so that's part of what our group wants to do. And then what we heard yesterday at the gang task force meeting is that transportation is a big issue for people. I know it's hard. I see a lot of middle-class people out there in the audience. There's people who live in poverty and they don't have cars, and getting from the east side of Santa Barbara to Goleta and back really is a challenge. And so I think there's a lot of us that are trying to figure out how to solve the transportation issue, how to get people to the services that they need, and then even to let them know what resources are out there. The food bank does wonderful stuff. Recently, when the government shut down, food stamps, the food stamp benefit was cut from a lot of people, and there was kind of an emergency response in Santa Barbara to let people know who relied on that benefit that they could get some food distribution through the food bank, and there's a few of them around town. So you create that grassroots interaction, and we can take care of each other when there's stressors. Thank you.
Go ahead, Elsa.
Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center runs a 24-hour hotline, and some of the callers, because of the nature of sexual violence, call in or present as suicidal, and we have measures through the hotline and sometimes in conjunction with local law enforcement to ensure that somebody is safe. We take certain steps, we take it seriously, and this is available for English and Spanish speakers, adolescent through adult, so that service is available.
Great. There are a number of questions dealing with legislation, and perhaps this could be for Joyce Dudley or advocates in the room, or council members, and certainly how the coalition, what can happen on an advocacy level with the coalition. Questions such as, there's so many gun laws that create a confusing patchwork, might leaving some gun owners at risk, perhaps, who are using guns or have guns legally. How can we prevent people with mental illness from getting guns? And basically, what can we do? I would add, especially in the state of California, that has actually quite an extensive array of gun violence prevention legislation on the books, but obviously we live in a country where it's different from state to state, and that might affect us. So are there forms of legislation that's missing that should be enacted? And I think the issue about dealing with people with mental illness and trying to connect that, is it done by legislation? I mean, are there, but I guess we'll focus there first. Who would like to start there? It's a big question.
About the mental illness aspect? As I said in my little talk, the severely mentally ill there's only 5% of those people who are considered dangerous. The problem is that all of us in our lives, we experience moments of crisis or things that go wrong. It's at those times, whether it's suicide or a breakup in the family, that people should seek help. And that's when also it's most dangerous to have a firearm in the home. The other thing is what Kathy had talked about is the nexus of alcohol and firearms. This was a bill that we did put before the governor, and Senator Jackson mentioned it. It was that the bill was if a person had experienced 2 DUIs, driving under the influence, that they would lose their privilege to have a gun for a period of time. That the county, many counties all over this country, we don't have enough money for services at the county level. They're overburdened. And in terms of our insurance, I am a therapist. I'm a marriage family therapist. And for people to get mental health counseling is very difficult in terms of their insurance. But we need to try and do what we can to help people. And if you have a problem in your family, it's really essential to seek help before it gets to a point where violence is going to erupt. That's the dangerous part. And we also request, in terms of situations of abuse, that, let me say this. As a therapist, one of the questions that I ask the very first day someone comes to see me is, do you have any suicidal thoughts, and do you have a gun in the home? Every mental health professional, every medical health professional should ask that question.
Anyone else on the panel about legislation? Go ahead.
As I said earlier, it's about the community being active in any form of legislation, especially when it comes to having sensible gun regulations. And we have the NRA that has a huge bank account that they use, and in going against them, it's our votes. It's the people's votes. Whether they can tune out that message and organize at the grassroots level and communicate and not buy into what you hear on the radio or see on TV, and convince others to vote for sensible gun regulations, that's how you could have laws enacted. And being active in writing, emailing, and phoning elected officials is a big part of getting legislation passed. Whether you run into them at a store and you can steal a couple of minutes away from an elected official and talk to them a little bit how you feel, or making an appointment to drop into their office. But it takes grassroots organizing from the community. If the community cares, then the community needs to act.
Okay. So today was 10/17, and at 10/17 there was an earthquake preparedness. I think Dr. Cash, you were dropping and rolling and doing, right? And so were many other public buildings dealing with preparing ourselves for if and when an earthquake happens. Dealing with prevention of safety. What things should we think about if we're in a situation at a school, at a public place, at home, at wherever, and someone with the intent to cause harm, either with a gun, comes onto your property? What are the things that we should be thinking about to keep us safe? And maybe we'll start with our law enforcement officers here.
With regard to incidents like that, popular philosophy that is being espoused these days is one called run, hide, and fight. The first advice being that if you're in an encounter like that, the first thing to try to do is to run away. In most circumstances, perpetrators are not likely to chase after people. So if you're in a workplace, a school, theater, anywhere, and someone walks in with a gun, if you have the opportunity to run away, by all means, run away. The second part of that is if you're not in a position to run away, then the advice is to hide. If you can secrete yourself somewhere and not be seen until law enforcement gets there or the situation subsides, that's probably the next best thing to do to keep yourself safe. And then lastly, if anyone, my advice to anyone who finds themselves about to suffer serious bodily harm or death, my advice to them is fight for your life with any means possible and never give up.
You said it, Riley. Perfect. I would just add to what he said. I mean, he said pretty much what I was going to say. Obviously, if you're in a position to call 911, as soon as practical, do that. And like we said, our deputies and our officers now are more equipped to respond in a solo fashion, where in the past our practices were wait for a couple officers and then go in, and now they're going to respond immediately solo if need be. But yeah, call 911, get yourself in a safe spot. You know, again, if you're confronted where you can't run, you can't hide, again, it's the mindset. Your body goes into the fight or flight response and fight. And I don't have the data, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but you know, I know there's a lot of women when they fight back, when someone's attacking them, the chances of survival, I believe, are a lot higher. My wife is a brown belt in Kung Fu, and I've taught her all along, hey, you know, you get attacked, if you just, again, that's a judgment call, so I don't want to advocate that specifically from the sheriff's office, but again, it's just something we all need to think about.
One other thing.
Okay.
People are conditioned to react in circumstances like that, we found, by what they see on television and the movies and all. And the reality is that people don't necessarily just fall over and die once you get shot or once you get hit. The military has done studies, and if you've been shot and you're still conscious, the likelihood is that you're going to survive. So a lot of people who might have otherwise survived incidents because maybe of their conditioning from what they've seen on television and elsewhere, you know, they lie down and give up, and it's tragic.
Joyce?
Many of us don't have guns, but we all have gut. We have a gut feeling, and that is going to keep you safe. So, but we're also polite sometimes. So we'll be about to walk into an elevator, and our gut will be saying that doesn't feel safe to walk into that elevator with that person. Step back and don't go in the elevator. Or when you're walking down the street and your gut tells you this is someone that I'm uncomfortable being around, don't be around them. Trust your gut.
I will, when I was a teenager once, this is in New York City, and I was walking from a friend's house to my house, and I had a big school bag. If you were in high school, I think it's still the case, you're walking like this because you're having a lot of books in your bag, and there was a group there that said something, and they had a stick, and they wanted to touch my bag, and I yelled out more expletives than I ever thought. It just sort of came out. It's like, what the, are you, no, and it was amazing. They were so taken aback by that because it was just so unexpected, and I just walked really fast home at that point. But I think that instant reaction, and don't be afraid to be rude if you need to be, I think that was, and trust your gut is a good one. Tony, did you have something?
Yes. I do think that one of the most important things a person can do is keep your head. Don't be scared. There's one other thing that I wanted to mention about safety in homes. You know, people say, well, you know, they need a gun to keep safe. There are many other alternatives. One of the ones that I think is really effective is a motion detector. Motion detectors do all sorts of things. They can turn on your sprinklers, they can turn on lights. We had a neighbor who lived next door, and their motion detector was so sensitive that birds flew by, and a voice yelled out, "Get off of the seawall." And I had to ask the neighbor to dial it down a bit. And this was, you know, 15 years ago. Motion detectors are at all different price levels. You can get one that is not expensive, and that is a very safe thing to have.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end. I wanted to give Gina an opportunity, if people wanted to get involved with the Santa Barbara Response Network, how they can do so.
Yeah, I wanted to say something because it was very interesting sitting here, just that it's very important for each of us to take a position in how we feel about what's going on with the proliferation of guns. It's a personal decision, a personal choice. And sometimes it can feel very discouraging, and it can feel like there's nothing we can do, we cannot give up. Whatever it is, we have to keep the energy, and we have to talk about it, we have to be open, and we have to listen, and we have to keep the fight. And just that it's important in town halls like this that we all be with each other, just like in the video where we said, you know, let's talk about it, let's say where we're at. The Santa Barbara Response Network that the mayor was referring to is a grassroots organization of volunteers that was formed about 4 years ago when we had a rash of young Latino suicides. And we formed, we had training, we had someone come in to do some training, and we offer psychological first aid in the aftermath of critical incidents. And they can be disasters, they can be suicides, violence, a public incident that's traumatized people. And I have information at the back where we're called in, we have to be asked in to respond, but we offer psychological first aid, which minimizes trauma immediately after an incident. And we've done a lot of work in the Latino community with families that have been impacted. I know Dr. Casas was originally on the team. Palabra has been part of it. A lot of the grassroots organizations are part of it. Law enforcement, you know, police. We welcome you to be a part of that, and we have trainings. Actually, I have one on Saturday on psychological.
Saturday, what time?
From 9 to 1.
Where?
At the First United Methodist Church. Okay. And I have information here.
And also on Saturdays, a pro-youth movement meeting, I believe. What time and where?
Our pro-youth movement is meeting at Trinity Episcopal Church at 1 o'clock. We serve lunch at 12:30, and we'll be talking about the proposed gang injunction. But if you want to come and get involved with any of our pro-youth activities, you're so welcome to come.
Okay. Is there anything the panelists really feel like they need to say before they were done with the evening that they haven't said briefly? And now's your chance. Yes, Ms. Murillo.
If I'm correct, a lot of these terrible shooting incidents have happened with mentally ill people. Tony, the Newtown, the Gabby Giffords incident, and right here in the Goleta post office, I know that woman had mental health issues.
Aurora was another one.
I'm sorry?
Aurora.
Okay. And if we had strong universal health care for every person in this country, you know, not just physical health and medical health, but mental health, we could address people's problems before it gets out of hand. The Federal Health Care Act, Obamacare, includes a small step towards everyone having access to mental health services. And it doesn't have to be something huge. It could be depression or you know, teenagers go through such, I was a tortured teenager. So I'm just giving a plug for single payer health care.
Anyone else on the panel have any last thoughts that they've been wanting to share and didn't have a chance to? Okay. I will, we do have a couple here who have offered to contribute $1,000 for the buyback of guns if the PD decides to participate. So there's, thank you. And I'll just read this one as we close. Thank you to the coalition for putting this forum together. Listening to tonight's speakers makes me feel proud of our community and hopeful that by continuing to work together, we'll make Santa Barbara a safer place. So if we could please give a big round of applause for our panelists, here. Thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you to Gary, thank you to Larry, thank you to the Coalition Against Gun Violence. There's lots of literature in the back and great organizations here who always could use your time, your treasure, and your talents. Thank you and good night. If you want to see, I'll put the